Let's try that one more time. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to be making another painting by another one of my favorite artists. This is our second painting, or two of two paintings, by the master, Agnes Martin. Agnes Martin is one of my favorite artists, and she's beloved by many, many, many other people, mostly abstract painters. Yesterday, we painted one of her paintings, this one, Untitled, from 1974. Let me see, I'll just show it on the overhead screen here. So this is the painting that we created yesterday. And maybe even, well, let's take a look at what they look like side by side. So this was what we did yesterday. And this is a pretty typical painting to what she was making from about 1965 until she retired from painting in around the mid-1990s. Although just yesterday I saw a painting that she did, or supposedly, right before she died in 2003. So, but today's painting that we are going to create is, let me get this up, is this one. So this painting, made in 1947, is a self-portrait, and before she went full-on abstraction. And I love this painting. I didn't even realize she had made paintings like, I mean, I suspected she had played around with a number of different styles. And as usual, when you have an abstract painter, they don't usually just start out right, pick up a paintbrush and start making a painting that looks like this. Or actually, it should be like that, but it could be hung that way, potentially. Usually they go through a period of, just like many people who are painting along with me today, of learning different art techniques, practicing by painting reproductions of the masters, just like we're going to be doing today. And slowly through that process, things start to kind of bubble to the surface, and one starts to kind of feel more attracted to one style over another, one particular, even a color palette, subject matter. Maybe it's still lives, or it's portraits of people, or landscapes, or urban landscapes, or historical paintings, paintings about historical events. There's tons of genres of different kinds of paintings. And just like that, Agnes Martin went through a period of experimenting with a number of different kinds of styles until right around this period, she starts to experiment with abstraction. And we'll take a quick little bit of a look here at her work. Actually, even before we jump into that, I want to let you know that there is an outline for today's painting. So this is the original image. And then this is the outline, which I've done. I do these on my iPad Pro using the Procreate app. I bring it in and I do a quick tracing of it. Some of them take me a lot longer than others. This one was fairly straightforward. So if you want to paint along with me, you could certainly sketch this out onto the canvas. But if you want to kind of jumpstart it and go right to the painting process, you can download that image from the Dropbox folder. You'll see that there's over 60 different images that we've already painted, from Da Vinci to Dali to Georgia O'Keeffe, and I mean, there's tons of different artists in here. If you click on the one down at the bottom here, Agnes Martin, you're going to see 6 files. You're going to see the outline for today's painting and the original one. There's actually 2 versions of the outline. One's a PDF and one's a JPEG. You'll also see yesterday's painting as well. Yesterday's painting, if you haven't done it, might be an interesting thing to go back to after having painted today's painting, and just see if, which style maybe speaks to you most clearly? Because I know probably, knowing my audience, most people are going to gravitate towards this particular painting. But I think if you really want to understand Agnes Martin, taking a couple of hours out of your day to attempt this one would be well worth the time spent. There's a few people here, we'll check on the Facebook group, who've done just that. So, speaking of which, we'll go to the Facebook group, and I'll just show you here that this is a private group just for people who are painting along with me. I encourage you to join it. There's most of the people watching today's episode have never seen me before, have never attended one of these classes. I encourage you to join it. Make today's painting, upload it to the Facebook group here. It's a great community, a very supportive community. Most of the people in this community were beginners, painters, people who had little to no painting experience and have slowly over time blossomed into fantastic artists and are now creating great works that come directly from inside, that are inspired by things that they see and love. And that's the most exciting thing for me as a teacher, to see people transform and to find that artist that exists, I believe, within everyone. So please join the Facebook page here. Let's go right to the outlining process. I'll show you how that's done, and then we'll come back after we've got the painting set up and primed, and we'll take a look at Agnes Martin's biography here. So let's make this big. So I'm going to play this video, and I'm going to skip through it a little bit ahead and just show you a little bit about how one can transfer an image onto a canvas quite easily. So I just take the outline, I download from the Dropbox folder, and place it onto one of these canvases. This is a 9x12 sized canvas, just a little bit bigger than your photocopy piece of paper. Which I like because it gives me a little bit of extra room around the sides, and if you're ever planning on framing an artwork, it's good to have a little bit of extra space around the edges so that you're not cropping in on that painting. You'll see that I'm using carbon paper here. You can get carbon paper from any art supply store, and if you can't find it there, you can order it online. There's an Amazon link in the description below. And you can also find it from most fabric stores will sell carbon paper or graphite paper. Either one works just as well. And you can use double-sided or single-sided. Single-sided is best because you don't really need to do it on both sides. You see I'm using double-sided carbon paper, which is, when I peel this off, there's kind of an image on the other side here that is a little bit unnecessary. Yeah, real quick. I mean, the purpose of doing these outlines is not to have the greatest image ever. You can see I'm missing a little bit of the drawing on the top. That's fine. We'll just finish that off here with the pencil in a second. Okay, and when you're all done, you're going to have an image like this. And as I said, let's get a pencil. And I'm just going to quickly draw her hair in on the top, right? And if you want, you could do the same thing. Extend these lines towards the bottom. And just like that, we've got an image on the canvas ready to paint. The next step, and this is what I typically do every single episode, is I take some warm yellow. You could use virtually any color for this. Probably desirable to use a lighter color than a darker color, but we've all seen the dogs playing poker done on black velvet. So if you wanted to do something a little bit fun and different, you could use a different color. But traditionally, artists will put a ground or a wash down over top of the white canvas, and that helps establish, I mean, there's many different reasons, and we've talked about this ad nauseum over the past, 118 episodes. One of which, for our purpose, is really to protect the drawing down here and to kind of cement it down there so it's less likely to mix in or get smudged by subsequent layers of paint. But I often think of it as a way of just getting paint onto the canvas. A lot of artists struggle with that first brush stroke. It's so intimidating to put paint onto the canvas. Whereas if you've already put on this big wash over top of everything, well then the scariest part of making a painting has already been completed, right? So I'm just going to take this. I put a little bit of water in the paint. This is literally the only time I ever use water in my acrylic painting, except to wash my paintbrushes. And I would strongly recommend that you do so as well. I have, in some of the earliest episodes that I did in the Intro to Painting class, I did use water frequently, mostly just because I knew most people who are new to acrylic, that's how they are going to be painting. And they maybe don't have any other mediums to mix into the paint in lieu of water. So I kind of wanted to make these episodes as accessible as possible. But as you progress as an artist, you want to consider using other materials, other acrylic mediums to mix into your paint besides water. You also, I apologize, I am not feeling the greatest. I have a bit of a cold. It's not the cold. We got our test results. My daughter and I went to the hospital and got our COVID tests yesterday, and thank goodness we're still negative. Nevertheless, neither of us is at 100%, and so I'll try my best to keep the sniffles down as much as possible, because I know how annoying that can be. But you'll have to forgive me. There may be a few moments here where I sniffle uncontrollably, and so that I'm not using a Kleenex every few minutes here. But hopefully we will get through this episode together as well as possible. Now I'm just realizing I was a little sloppy there on the sides. I'm not so concerned about this extra little bit of paint showing through or anything, because we're going to cover that up. The only thing I'm just thinking about is it might slow down the drying process. Whenever we have big clumps of paint anywhere, that's just going to take longer for that paint to dry, right? Okay. So oh, lots of people in the chat tonight. Oh, that's exciting. So now I'll let this dry for... It's... I feel really hot, but it's probably my body trying to get over this cold, so I'm not sure. It should be dry on its own in about another 2-3 minutes. And if not, I'll just use the hairdryer to speed up that drying process. And while that's happening, let's just take a quick look at, or I'm just going to take a quick look at some of the things in the chat here. Maybe I'll put up, and we'll talk about her biography here as well. Maybe let's put this here in case anyone wants to read ahead. I'll blow that up. Eleanor says, hope you and your daughter are feeling better. I appreciate that. Thank you, Eleanor. That's very kind of you. Eleanor says, I have been using matte varnish with my underpainting, warm yellow, and I was wondering if I should be using matte gel or matte medium instead of matte varnish. Huh. That is an interesting question. Typically, I've never heard of anyone using a varnish as like a paint layer. Varnish, depending on the brand, varnish traditionally is used as at the very, very, very end of the painting, and sometimes not even by the artists themselves. It's usually used as a way to protect the painting from splashes or scratches or even graffiti, because the benefit of varnish is that if you have the correct materials, you can actually remove the varnish from a painting. So typically when you see paintings being cleaned, or you see a painting that, you know, there's YouTube videos of famous paintings that are being cleaned by conservators. Really what they're doing is they're removing the varnish, the final layer off of the painting, so that they can get at the actual paint itself and potentially, you know, seal cracks or replace flakes or all that kind of stuff. So varnish, yeah, I've never heard of anybody mixing varnish into a paint and applying it. My main concern would be potentially that would make the painting that's on top of that varnish layer unstable, that it could possibly come off in some way, because it's like, it's the difference between, it's sort of like you have a layer of Velcro in there, and potentially you could peel off the painting that you've painted on top, as opposed to just, you know, glue, because acrylic paint is basically glue. It's a lot like white glue, right? That's an interesting, I would strongly recommend that you use a matte medium, or water, I guess, or matte gel. Gel is usually thicker, so it's going to give you a lot more texture. Let me see. Donna's here as well. Looks. Hello, Donna. My dog is being needy tonight, pawing my chest and trying to lick my neck. I left her alone for 4 hours today. Yes, I bet your dog wants a little bit of love. And Maria's here. Hi, everyone. Get better soon. And Lori says, some say to put a warm underpainting on a cool painting and a cool underpainting on a warm painting. I know this isn't what you recommend. I can't figure out the reasoning, and I wonder if you know. Okay, great question. That's a sip of tea question. So does that's a bit of a okay. So the purpose of an underpainting is to infuse the rest of the painting, or the paint that is eventually painted over top of it. So let's say on top of this painting, right? So the purpose of me painting anything on here, whether it's yellow or brown or a red, which are really the most typical underpainting colors you would put on here, probably a earthy brown, like a reddish brown, would probably be the number one most typical color. The reason I use yellow is it's really the fastest one. Using the palette we have, you could just get a brown and put it on here. People will use different, like burnt umber or burnt sienna, but since I don't use those particular paints, I do have them behind here, but I don't want to start digging through my paints to find them. Well, let me see. Do I have a burnt umber? Oh, yellow ochre. So this would be another, like a yellow ochre would actually be quite would be something many acrylic painters would use. Any kind of a brown, because the idea is that it's sort of like a middle value between white and black. Some painters will even use gray and put like a middle gray in between, so that you're darkening and lightening, and you've already kind of covered that middle area of the paint. Now, the reason why artists use browns and reds and yellows is that they're these kind of warm, organic colors, and they're really useful for landscapes and portraits, because, you know, everyone has, you know, underneath our skin, we've got all this blood pumping under there, we've got all this warmth underneath our skin, and in the landscape there's likewise the energy, the warmth in the landscape that is emanating from within trees and grass and earth, etc., right? So those colors work really well, because they're going to give your painting this kind of glowing effect. We have done a few paintings where we've painted the opposite. We've put in, like, the most recent one, because I saw someone posting on the Facebook page, Yoshitomo Nara painting, this Japanese artist who's famous for his, in fact, let me just see on the Facebook group if I can find that image really quickly. Somebody brought it up here. So you could see someone, this is Sandra, posted these images, because this is the process that I recommended, because I think this is what Yoshitomo Nara actually did, was put on this pink, bright, cold pink, our magenta, the color that we use as our cold color, cold red. We put that on as our first layer because it infused the painting with this kind of uncanny strangeness. We ended up painting this very kind of childlike image, but Nara doesn't consider himself like a painter of children's toys. He, I think, he's using those images from anime and manga and kind of subverting them and giving them this little bit of a creepy vibe, right? So he used kind of a non-traditional color to give that painting this little slightly unsettling effect of, like, so you may not even know that that pink is under there, but you might be looking like, well, there's something, what is it about this painting that it looks very childlike, but it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, right? So artists will use interesting color combinations like that on the final face, the final surface is not necessarily evidently there, but your brain recognizes it. Your eyes are making those computations and sending signals to your heart or your brain, and are causing certain kinds of eliciting emotions from you. So your question about putting warm colors under a cool painting or cool colors under a warm painting, that is often one of the reasons that artists would do that, is so that you're kind of counteracting one or the other and kind of giving a little bit of warmth to a particularly cool painting, or giving a little bit of coldness to a warm painting. I've pretty much settled on this particular kind of yellow because I generally want lots of glowing warmth coming out of my paintings. But certainly you could experiment and use also. I mean, we did that way back at the very beginning of the acrylic painting course. We did a Hilma af Klint painting, and she was an early abstract painter. Some say one of the very first abstract painters of all time, and that would actually be a good companion series of pieces to make to Agnes Martin. Agnes Martin obviously painting 50 years after Hilma af Klint, but we divided up that canvas and we painted different colors on the background, and then we made this kind of circular painting over top of it afterwards. And I think that kind of would really show you how those underpainting colors affect the final colors on top. Okay, so let's I hope that answers your question. I mean, that it's a big question, and there's many different artists who have very different philosophies about this. I would say the majority of artists, particularly artists I see posting videos on YouTube, don't put any color on at all. Excuse me. Most artists will just start painting directly onto the white of the canvas. Something that I don't discourage it, I just encourage this. I just think it also, if there's little gaps and spaces between colors, you don't just have this empty blank white of the canvas showing through. At least there's some other color leaking through the gaps there. Okay, so let's get to the painting, and let's put some color on the palette. So I think we're going to use most of the colors that we have here, And everything that I use can fit inside of a shoebox, right? And I think that's really important, that because I know I'm fortunate enough to have a studio where I can, you know, right now I could run off and, I don't know, go for a jog if I wanted, and everything would stay in place. But I know many people are painting on their kitchen tables or in their bedrooms, on their bed, and you might have to pack up in a fairly quick manner. And so being able to fit everything in a small box, that's another reason, beyond the fact that I think this limited split primary palette works so well, is that we can get, you know, probably 95% of every single color that is visible to human beings with these 6 colors. There are some that we were unable to get, super saturated, almost fluorescent colors we cannot mix with this simple palette, but those colors are so unusual and so seldomly used in paintings that you would really, you'd almost have to, like, I can't even think of, like, you can buy those colors in an art supply store, and I actually own a few of them just because I'm a art supply addict, but I've never found a use for those super, super saturated colors. Let me just get another yellow here. We'll use that as needed. Okay, so this is nice and dry, except along the edges. That's fine. So let's take a look at the image and just sort of think about how we want to approach today's painting. Okay, so the first thing I could say is I think using a yellow on this particular painting, or a brown, is almost exactly what she did here. I would be very surprised if she did anything other than that, particularly because this painting, you know, she's born in 1912, so how old would that make her? She's in her kind of mid-30s, what, about 35 when she's done this? At this point in her career, she has gone to several art schools. She's a highly educated person, super intelligent person. She is, at this point, also very interested in Zen Buddhism, and Eastern philosophy was one of the courses she took while she was in university. She has graduated with her master's degree. She's now teaching people. And traditionally, the method that artists would use to make portraits and landscapes, as I said, would be to apply some sort of warm yellowish ground to get started. So having established that, let's just zoom in on this painting and see what else we notice. One of the first things that comes to my mind as I look at this painting is it looks like there's a fairly thick application of paint. So if you wanted to actually mix in some gel mediums and that kind of thing to thicken your paint up today, that would be something that seems would be quite appropriate. Like you can almost see that build up on the cheeks in particular, where we see some white. Like there's high texture to this painting. It's one of those paintings that if you were to see it in a museum, this one is in a private collection, so it could be on loan to a museum for all I know, but as far as I know, it's on someone's house at home. This would be the kind of thing that people would probably, little kids and big kids like me, would want to go up and touch, because you're like, oh, I just want to feel what that texture feels like. So that's the kind of the main thing that I'm gleaning from looking at it closely is high texture, and this I would almost imagine some of this reddish color up here. I bet you that could be some of the original underpainting that's coming through. Okay, so having established that, what I want to do is usually I want to paint the background first and then go to the foreground and then go back to the background, finish that off, and then finish on the foreground. That way I can establish that the person is in front of the background, right? As opposed to if we painted the background last and it's overlapping parts of the hair or body, then it can give this slightly unsettling feeling to the viewer of like that's like, what's going on there? There's something odd about this painting. I can't put my finger on it. Again, some artists do that very deliberately. They want the viewer to be unsettled. And you might say, that's weird. Why would anybody want the viewer to be unsettled? That's the story of modern art. Modern art is all about unsettling the viewer and causing, in some cases, like shock, right? We talked about Cubism on Tuesday with Kathleen Munn and how outrageous those paintings were to people at the time. Like, literally people were, like, protesting outside of art galleries and museums that these Cubist paintings were scandalous, right? So, I'm going to paint a cool green and cool browns into the background. So let's mix up. Let's get these side by side here. Okay, so I think I'm going to get even a little bit more cool yellow on here. And let's start with like a cool green. So we'll put some cool blue here and some cool yellow. And we're going to get this kind of bright, cool green. And I love this color. I love this bright green that we get when we mix these two together. It's very saturated, but you could see that color doesn't really exist in this painting. Like, it approaches it a little bit here, but for the most part, it's been not diluted. It's been a little bit desaturated with some red, which brings us to the browns up here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some cool red from on the opposite side of the palette, right, which is going to suck this color from the outside edge of the color wheel. It's going to pull it towards what I call the neutral core. Right, in the neutral core, when things cross or get near the neutral core, they lose their color intensity. Right, so we put a little bit of this red in here. And you can do it to various different degrees by adding warm yellow or warm red or warm blue, but you're just going to get slightly different effects and not quite as strong as an effect as if we go right on, literally across the color wheel. So now we do this, we actually get a color that is not too dissimilar from warm yellow and warm blue, right? Because they are also on the opposite side of the color wheel. So we get, if we do that, we get a little bit more of a grassy green, and I see a bit of that in this painting. So let's take, I'm going to put a bit more yellow back in here. I feel like it got a little bit too dark. Again, sorry about that sniffling. If it was me, it would drive me crazy. So, I'm going to take this color and I'm going to take it and just begin by painting this area here. Now, as I paint it, I think to myself, well, I guess it could be even a little bit lighter, but I think I'll paint a subsequent layer of maybe a little bit lighter green afterwards. So I just want to establish this color now. I'm going to paint the whole thing like this. And then I'm going to, because I think one thing that she is very famous for doing, Agnes Martin layered paint, thin layers of paint over and over and over and over and over again. Especially, you know, her most famous paintings might have 5 to 10 different layers of the same color on the same painting. And we talked about this yesterday, so I don't want to repeat myself too much today. But since probably a lot of people are just coming to this painting, just quickly we can talk about the difference between applying a thick layer of one color and many thin layers of the same color, and how that will create very different effects. Okay, so we've got this down here. That's going to take a few minutes to dry. And so what I was talking about is, by applying many layers of color, we're complicating the eventual color that people see. As the Coles Notes, or Reader's Digest of how color works, is you can think of like, imagine the painting as like a sandwich, right? And you've got, let's say, bread on the top, you've got cheese and mayonnaise and salami and tomatoes and lettuce, and then bread on the very bottom. And the bread on the bottom is the canvas itself, your support, right? The way that light works is light will go all the way through, right all the way through all the different layers of that sandwich, hit that bottom piece of bread, and then bounce all the way back up and hit your eye. Now, when we see it, we just see, we think all we see is that top layer of bread. We think that's all there is. When in fact, what we're seeing is that all of those colors that are on top of that bottom piece of bread, all those colors are bouncing back to our eyes and then mixing in our brain. All right, so what she's doing, and what a lot of painters have done throughout history, is adding lots of thin layers of paint. And that there's I mean, tons of different reasons why you would do that. But one thing that it does is it creates this really complex color that is impossible for somebody to mix, like to literally just mix that one color on their palette and paint it, because there is maybe dozens of those different mixes happening together. So that creates just this like symphony of color that you can't get from one guitar, or, you know, like, does that make sense? Like, instead of just playing one note on your guitar, you have like a whole orchestra playing the same note, right? Which is, or maybe not even just the same note, hundreds of different notes together, right? Okay. How many metaphors can I stack on top of one another in my attempt to explain these concepts? Sandwiches and painting and orchestras. But that's, you know, often, in all seriousness, the only way to sort of explain some of these things is to use metaphors, because I mean, at least for me, I don't come from a scientific chemical background, chemistry background, so I need analogies to make it understandable to myself. Otherwise, we could get a chemistry professor in here who could explain the actual intricacies of how paint works. Okay, so I'm going to leave this background as it is. Let's now move on to the rest of the body here. And where should we begin? I think, you know, I could have actually, now that I look at it, I could have painted the same green down here. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to mix a warm green here, and we'll see the difference between these two colors side by side. So, since I was talking about this earlier, let's actually do it. So let's take some warm yellow and some warm blue and put them side by side here and mix this together. And you can already see the difference between these two colors. This one is still more saturated, whereas this one just has a bit more of, almost looks brownish already, right? Now I might lose some of my lines that I drew on here on her clothing, but I can, well, actually I can see a bit of it coming through. But of course, you know, that's should be relatively easy for us to paint again, or to find. You don't want to be super reliant on these lines. They're really just there to kind of help you get the overall composition here. Okay. So what you should see here, is that we have two greens. We've got a cold green, although it has been desaturated a little bit with some cold red, so it does pull it a little bit closer to this color. But essentially we've got a cold color and a warm color here. And the warm color should visually sit forward, while the cold color should go a little bit further back. Now, both of them are kind of crisscrossing through the neutral course. They're not full on warm or full on cold. You could, you know, so it's not like we have a hot color and a freezing cold color here. We've sort of got like a lukewarm warm and a slightly colder than room temperature green, if that makes sense. So we're not going to have major oppositions of color to create massive depth in the painting, but we've got a little bit happening here, if that makes any sense. Okay. So let's move on to, let's do her skin. Okay, so this is another thing I often forget. The way that I would paint the painting on my own is different than the way that I would teach people to paint. If I was going to do this painting right now and do it as quickly as possible, what I would do is I would mix a skin tone and quickly just paint it right over the entire face. Now what would happen is I'd probably obscure most of the facial features. I've been painting for over 20 years and I have confidence I'd be able to find all those facial features no problem, but I think that might be a bridge too far for some people watching. So bearing that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to really quickly paint these facial features with a dark color, which I'm going to mix here, and then paint over it so that I don't lose those facial features. And I could have done this, in fact, maybe I'll do those lines on her shirt with the same color. So that one of the darkest colors that I can mix with this limited palette is taking warm red and cool blue. And if I mix these two together, they're pretty much opposite one another on the color wheel, so they kind of cancel each other out, right? One's cold and one's warm. Boom, they come together, they collide, and they make this really dark purpley color, right? And I often use this color to make a gray, especially if I add just a little bit of yellow. That's going to kind of take it even more towards this, kind of lock it into the center. So I'm going to use this dark color. Let's get a small brush. And how about I'll zoom in for... Okay. So I'm just going to go over top of some of these lines, not all of them. And they don't have to be perfect. This is just like a bit of a placeholder for me so that I can find these through. They'll kind of bleed through subsequent layers of paint. So if I don't get the shape of the eyes exactly right, that's fine. Let's affect. Just quickly get her chin line here. And then just a little bit in the hair. Okay. And then I'm also just going to go up here and we'll just sort of get some of these lines that are on her clothing. I could have done this earlier, I guess. In fact, where did I put my outline? Huh. I don't know where that went. Anyway, I have the outline that I used for this. It might actually be easier to look at this as I do this. And you can see, like, even just using this dry brush, just sort of dancing over the surface here, kind of already looks a little bit about how she would have approached this painting. I think, was there another one in here? Let's move this here. And as I do this, you know, afterwards I can change these lines, I can move them and make them bigger or smaller, etc. I shouldn't feel locked into them at all. The other thing I'm looking at as I do this painting, let's zoom out even more here, is the original let's go zoom back out here. You know, the original sort of ends right there. I've got like a little bit extra on the sides, so I'm actually thinking maybe this right now has got this very triangular thing. I could see the body like actually ending, like her arm coming down here on both sides. Maybe I'll do that as I get into my next few layers of paint in the background. Particularly, I'll crop that in because I think that would maybe be more appropriate. Otherwise, it looks like she's sort of sitting with like her arms almost out like that, right? Which would be a pretty unnatural pose for somebody, you know, either a self-portrait or whatever. Like maybe it looks like she's kind of flying. So we'll probably so this way it'll look more like her. If we chop off the edge down here, it'll maybe look like more like she's sitting in a chair with her hands on the, you know, the armrests or something, right? Okay. 1 second here. Okay, had to do a quick little blow my nose there, otherwise things were going to get nasty. So, okay, I don't think anybody wanted to see that. Okay, this looks like I'm going to blow dry it really quickly also, because there's a little bit of paint on the face. It's still a little wet, and since I'm going to paint over it, I don't want that paint to smudge, so I'm going to mute. Okay, so let's mix a skin tone next. So to make a skin tone, the easiest way, I mean, obviously you could buy a tube of it, and that's like the sort of generic Caucasian skin tone. I think the easiest, cheapest, and from a learning perspective, the best way to do it is to mix it yourself. I'm going to take some warm yellow and a little bit of warm red. We'll mix this together. We'll get an orange. It's a little bit too orangey. That's okay, especially since this is an early layer, right? So we'll then take some warm blue and mix this together, and then we get a brown. Now, if you mix this color and it looks too purple, right, then you know that you've got maybe too much red and too much blue. You mix it together and it looks too greenish, that means you've got too much yellow and too much blue. It looks too orangey, then you've got too much red and too much yellow, right? And it's just the managing the quantities of each of these paints that's going to create the difference. I'm going to take some white and let's maybe mix this right here. So this actually looks pretty close to the color that we see in the face. Now, obviously, there's lots of colors in the face, but we could start out with this. This would be what you might call like your local color. And the local color is, if you were to pick one color out of a box of crayons, this might be the color you pick, right? Even though there's all sorts of different colors in her face. So I'll take this color, and I'm just going to paint it quickly. And even if you get this color quote-unquote wrong, I wouldn't be too hard on myself, because we're going to put subsequent layers of color over top of it anyway, just like we're going to do with her, the clothes down here. Obviously it's not a green, it's a blue, so we'll do all of that. And especially if you're thinking of really adding a lot of texture to this painting. So you can see how helpful it is to have those darker lines. underneath here, even though I've painted these with one of my darkest colors on my palette, because there's a lot of white in this color, it kind of obliterated the nose and the eyebrows, etc., right? Okay. Now, I'm going to also, since I've already got this brown mixed right here, I'm just going to take this brown, maybe I'll add a little bit more blue to it. I'm going to apply this in the hair. So one of those colors with just a little bit of white becomes her skin tone. The exact same mixture of color minus the white, a little bit more blue, becomes a lovely brown that we can use in the hair, right? Okay. So we basically got this painting in here. Or the underpainting mostly established here, which is great. That makes me excited. We're an hour into the painting. We've got all of the foundational layers of this painting established. And then I think this is sort of where, you know, the fun can start to begin here. As I look at it, I also see it's got this kind of, let's zoom in. What is the color of her eyes? We've got a kind of a green, almost the same kind of color that's back here. And obviously a little bit of white in the eyes. So maybe I'll do a little bit of that just right now. I'll take a little bit of this white that we had here. I'm just going to mix a little bit of skin tone on there. Often if I paint white directly in there, it's just going to be way too bright. Let's zoom in here. Okay. A little bit of that on either side. Don't need much. Let's take, so I got a bit of this green left. Maybe I'll put a bit more yellow into this green. I didn't even notice it at first, which is good. I think it's good that my primary focus wasn't on little details as to like what is the color of these eyes when I'm just getting the painting begun. In fact, I'm just going to paint that right over. I'm thinking about the big areas of color, establishing all of those first. And then next, I'm going to let's take a bit of warm red. Even a bit of this skin tone we had here, right? Gonna take a bit of that, just so it's not quite such an intense bright red here for these lips. So, do I want to do any shadows on here? I think I'll just leave it like that for right now. So we'll zoom back out. What's so wild, now that I'm just looking at it, it really reminds me of my mother's mom, my grandmother. Had kind of that same sort of haircut, almost the same sort of expression. This is kind of funny. I see Paula says, you should go get cold medication. It will surely help your cold. I took one last night. I'm doing fine today. Oh, I'm had my fair share of medication. I'll probably wake up tomorrow morning and have forgotten I actually made today's episode. So I could just collapse on the floor here. I've had so much Dayquil. But I appreciate the suggestion. Yes, I've got Dayquil. I've got some Claritin. I'm amped up for sure, and I'm drinking caffeine. Josh says, I think you have heard of it, but there was a restoration of a Vermeer painting that appears to be a Cupid behind it. I sent it to the Facebook group. I haven't seen that painting, Joshua. I haven't looked on the Facebook group in much detail. I usually just check it really quickly before these episodes. So I apologize I haven't seen that. But it is not uncommon when paintings are restored that they often do an X-ray of the painting, and they can see like layers, because often artists would recycle the same paint, or take a painting, make a painting, and then rather than just get a brand new painting, they would just paint over that painting, especially students in art school. It happens less so these days, but 500 years ago, a flat panel of wood was really kind of uncommon. It was really hard to do that. All of it was done by hand, of course, right? And if you weren't painting on panel, you were probably painting on canvas, which again had to be woven. And then often canvases were prepared with rabbit skin glue. Nowadays we use a thing called PVA size, which I use for my acrylic paintings. I don't know where my PVA is, somewhere back there. But PVA is essentially like it smells a lot like white glue, and it stabilizes the surface. All in all is just to say that the actual painting itself, the structure of the painting, those were expensive. And if you were an artist with limited means, you would even if you were happy with the painting you made, if it didn't sell or didn't find a buyer, then you would probably just paint over it and make something else in hopes that that painting would find a buyer, right? So that's why we often see so many paintings that have other images underneath them. Sometimes as they're being cleaned, we accidentally maybe take off the top layer of paint, and then it reveals something that, maybe, let's say in a painting like this, there could have been something on the wall or a vase of flowers next to her, but she's painted it over for whatever reason, right? Okay, so let's do. We've got, this is what I would call a great underpainting, right? So what we want to do now is elevate this underpainting to a finished painting. So we've got our background underpainting established. We've got this cool green, and then we've got these warm colors in the foreground, right? So we've got our spaces kind of set out. You will see that I'm going to paint probably a cool blue on top of this here, kind of almost like a turquoisey cool blue on her sweater. Now, what's great is we've got all these warm colors. We've got 2 layers of warm color here, right? We had the yellow that we put down first, which is a warm yellow, and then we had a warm green we put down here. And those 2 warm colors will counteract the cool blue that we'll put on top, right? So it's still going to want to come forward even though the final layer is cold. Similarly here, we had a warm color we put down here. Now we put a cold blue on top. And now we're going to put another series of cold colors over top to help push that background behind the figure. So let's do that right now. So we have this brown that we mixed, but this is a warm brown. And we want to use warm browns for her hair. We don't want to put a warm brown in the background because then we're going to have not only 2 colors that are very similar, and there could be a confusion as to maybe it looks like her hair just starts spreading outwards, and we don't want that. We also want the cool brown to look like it's further away from us than her hair, right? So let's mix a cool brown. Let's take some, where should we do this? Let's do this over here. Take some cool yellow. Maybe I'll take a bunch of it. I'm going to take some cool red. Let's mix these together and we'll get a cool orange, right? Which is, the oranges I often feel like look fairly similar to one another. They're very subtle, the differences between a warm orange and a cool orange. But let's mix some warm blue into this color. And you'll see that we start kind of getting some of the colors that we see in the painting to the left there. And I'm not going to fully mix this in because I like that there's this variety of color here. So let's see, where should we start? Maybe I'm going to apply this in here. And you can see that she's got a lot of texture in her painting. I could use, in fact, if I really wanted to go wild here, we use this heavy gel in a few different paintings we've done recently. I've packed them away. Actually here, you may recall this painting we did, right? The Anna Mulka Ahmed painting, which has a lot of texture to it, right? It's nice and thick and oh, it just feels so nice to touch that, right? The way that we built up all that texture is that we mixed the heavy gel medium into the paint and it gives it all this texture. Now I'm just thinking to myself, do I want to... Yeah, I'm going to use some of it here. So I'm going to scoop some of this out. I wasn't planning on doing this, but that's another thing I love about making art is you allow yourself to go on these little detours here. Now, I put a big healthy clump in here. I'm going to mix this into my paint. This is also going to mean I'm going to need more paint. So I'm going to get that. Let's get some more cool yellow. So look at this big, ugly, gross mixture of paint here. Now this will, the gel medium is going to dry clear. So I really want it to be mixed quite thoroughly into my paint, otherwise I'll have little areas that are poking through that look weird. But anyway, I'm going to take this paint and just sort of apply it yeah, I was not thinking of adding lots of texture to this paint, but this is sort of like what she did. She's applying paint in these kind of thick layers. Okay. Now, let's just see the original. So I got a lot of, this is maybe a very brown. So we'll lighten it up here with some other colors shortly. One thing, if I put heavy gel in my paint like this, it's going to take a long time for it to dry. It'll probably take at least 24 hours for some of these big peaks to dry. So that's can be good or bad depending on the way that you like to paint. So I just put a bunch more yellow in here. Now that's too yellowy. So I want some more red back in here. Now you don't have to do this at all if you don't want to. Let's see. So as I get a little bit closer to the bottom down here, I'm going to add more blue to this and get more greenish color. Need a bit more cool blue. Alright, so I've used up almost all of this gel here. And I'm just putting some of this paint on and sort of mixing it into the existing paint. And you can see that I'm sort of dancing around the canvas, trying to kind of keep things, my brush moving in as many different directions as possible so that it's I get lots of variety. Let's see, more of this right underneath her chin here. Oh, and I said I was going to trim these arms, didn't I? Let's do just that. Okay. So I could even have more yellow down here. Let me think about that. See a bit more yellow. This is just yellow right out of the tube. I'm kind of putting it in because I know it'll mix into this paint, right? Let's get a bit more of this yellow right here. Okay, I might do a little... The great thing with this is because it's going to take so long to dry, where it's a little bit thinner, that might dry by the end of today's painting. But probably most of it will be still wet by tomorrow morning. But if you could be nice and patient with your painting, I think you'll be really rewarded when you see that texture later on. So that's going to affect how I do the rest of today's painting. And, you know, we have done probably 10 or more portraits where I've shown fairly traditional, like speaking of Joshua talking about Vermeer, we did Girl with the Pearl Earring, right? So I showed how we can do that painting in a very traditional way using thin glazes, right? Using glazing fluid. I was planning on doing something similar with today's painting and kind of, you know, faking out this look but with glazes. But now that I've sort of gone down this road, which I didn't expect to be on, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put the same level of texture that we have in the background onto her face and her hair and her clothing, because I think it might look a little bit weird if I was if I had two very different styles not even side by side, integrated into this one painting. It's not like it hasn't been done before, but I don't see that in today's painting. Okay. Donna says, I love texture in my paintings. Yeah, I agree. Like, texture is really fun, and it's usually not something we see a lot of in beginner acrylic painting. Usually beginner artists, and to be fair, often when I'm teaching painting to beginner artists, I don't use a lot of texture because I want to, because it dries much faster, so it's easier to do on camera. Thin layers of paint are going to dry within literally minutes as opposed to like days. It's I think when we have a lot of texture on there, it can get a little bit unwieldy. Colors can get a little bit muddy, because if you start mixing colors together and those colors stay wet, it can get a little muddy. But it simulates a little bit more of what the oil painter would experience. Okay, so what should we do next now that we've got this on here? I think I might... Let's look at this. I think I might do... I'm probably going to... Let's do her skin, because her skin, we want the hair to be on top of the skin, and we want her clothing to be on top of her skin as well, right? So if we paint her hair and her clothes first, and then we paint her skin, it could have this weird thing of like that being on top. So let's go back to our palette here and kind of complicate some of these colors that we have here. I need some more warm yellow on my palette. And more warm blue. And because I'm going to be making big mixtures here, I'll need kind of extra, more paint than I would normally use. Again, you could do this with thin layers of paint. It's just different. Maybe you know, it's just different. Okay, so let's mix another brown. So let's take some warm yellow. Let's take less warm red. And there we go, that's a nice orange. Perfect. It gets harder when you're mixing large quantities. Anyone who's ever done any cooking knows, yeah, it's fairly easy to make, you know, a sauce for 4 people. If you've got to make a sauce for 400 people, ooh, then you're multiplying things, and you know, that's a. Isn't there a Seinfeld episode where Kramer is mixing something for he's making dinner for somebody? I can't remember. Anyway, everything was covered with Seinfeld, right? At some point or another. Okay, so very different green than I made before, or sorry, brown than I made before. So this here is a bit more of a greenish brown, right? So I'm going to put a little bit more red in here. And that warms it up a little bit more. Not that there isn't a place for a greenish brown, even in a face, but I think the majority of my paint I want to be a bit warmer. We are going to put some cold colors in that face, a few places. So we've got a little bit colder colors up here and here, and then obviously it gets warmer here, and then we've got kind of a little bit of a cool, this is some magenta on the face here. So now let's take that same color, I'm going to put it, mix over here with some white. And I'm also going to get my heavy gel out, since I've opened this Pandora's box of thick textured paint. Okay, so let's take a big healthy scoop of that and mix it in here. I'm going to need more white. It's a little bit deceiving when you're using gels and mediums, because they all look white when you take them out of the jar like that, but once that dries, it'll dry clear. I mean, if it's really thick, it'll be a little bit cloudy, but it will have a clear quality. So that's why I kind of like mixing a little bit in at a time, especially if I'm mixing it and I'm also adding white to it, because it's possible that this color is going to change as it dries. So one of those things that can drive a beginner painter crazy is, it's like, oh, you mean the painting could change after it's dry? Like that's a whole other thing I got to worry about. You can look at it that way, or you could think of it in a much more positive sense as like, yeah, isn't that exciting that the paint is, it's like alive, right? It's going to have a life cycle where it's going to be light and then dark. I find that really exciting, because then it's going to look different in 20 minutes than it's going to look like in a couple of hours, and it's going to look different overnight. And that's something you just sort of learn over time as a painter. Okay, so let's take this and let's zoom in here, because we're going to be pretty much on her face for the next maybe 20 minutes or so, I think. Let's put this here. Donna, your dog is on your shoulder now. Ah. That is pretty funny. Okay. So where should we begin with this color we've just mixed? I think what I'm going to do is just kind of to slop a bunch of this on here. This might be... I don't think she put as much texture on the face as she did on the background, for instance. So I'm going to have to be a little bit careful about getting too much paint into the so it doesn't mix into the colors next to it. But if it does, that's also it will happen. But I just want to try to avoid having too much of that, because it can be kind of frustrating if the colors are constantly mixing together and getting muddy. And if I'm losing some of these details, I can always kind of scrape things away and see if I can get down to some of those pencil lines. Okay. I think what I want to do now is start kind of modifying some of these colors a little bit. So I've got a pretty good application of this base layer on here. Where should we go? Which direction should we go first? Maybe let's go darker, and so we can get a little bit underneath her chin here. So let's take some of this darker color, and I'm just going to mix it right here. Let's take some of this, mix it in. And this way I can figure out where this chin is before it's gone kind of completely here. Right, and as I mix it into the white, it's going to lighten up a little bit. So I'm looking for areas of light and dark. Typically, light comes from above. So we're going to get most of the dark areas underneath the eyebrows, underneath the chin, underneath her lips here, underneath the nose. Okay. see. I think we need a little bit more. Up here. Okay, I'm just going to now take maybe a bit of a dark, this slightly dark, well, it's going dark really quickly. Let's brighten it up a bit. Some even darker brown. I think I need it, actually, maybe that blue that I had in there was not so bad after all. Okay. This brush is definitely getting a bit, you know, it's a lot of paint on this brush. Oops. Right, you just wipe stuff away if you're not happy with it. Okay, so I'm just wiping off a bunch of that excess paint off. It's getting a little bit wild, so let's take some of this white again and just build things back up if I think that's okay. I think I want to add a little bit more yellow into this paint. Up into, so let's take some of this yellow here. This is warm yellow. And you could think like this is where light is like hitting the face in its kind of most strongest areas, right? If it's light is coming in from above, it's going to be hitting the nose, the forehead, and the chin, and a little bit of the cheeks here. Probably also coming down here on her neck. Let's zoom out a little bit there. Yeah, let's put a bit of this. Okay, I'm gonna come back. Okay. Also, you know, I'm gonna take some of this blue, warm blue that I have here in my brown. I'm gonna take that and just try to get those nostrils. Looks like I'm gonna need to do that. It's going to be a little bit tricky doing some of this in her, on her face, some of those darker colors, but I'm up for the challenge. Might have been a bridge too far there, but let's now go in here on those lips. Maybe I'll just take some of that dark color off. There we go. Let's take some of this warm red and mix it into this brown. I'll actually have to shape those lips a little bit more. Well, I got the same color on here. Let's just take it back in. Get a little bit so it's not quite so intense. Ear there. I think I just got paint in my ear. A scratch in my ear and my big blob of paint, I think, is in there. I can't tell you how many times I've finished one of these classes and my wife is like, "Oh my God, what is that? Did you cut yourself?" And I'm like, "What? Oh my goodness, what?" And then, oh no, it's just paint. Okay, I'm going to take a bit of my cool red here. Just take a bit of this, and maybe let's mix that just off to the side. Okay, I think I might leave this for right now. I'm pretty happy with the way that's turning out. It's not done, but I want to move to her hair and then her clothing. And then by that point, that'll give me even more clues as to what to do with the rest of the face. Because often what I see people do is they finish one area, like, or what they believe is like completely finished, and then they move to another area and then finish that piece completely, and then something seems off. You know, another analogy would be if you were making Thanksgiving dinner, you probably wouldn't want to make the turkey and finish the turkey and then start making your mashed potatoes. And then when you're all done the mashed potatoes, then start doing the other 5 or 10 dishes you make, right? You're trying to do them all sort of at the same time, right? Which can be a little bit confusing if you've never cooked before, but you want everything to kind of come out of the kitchen within a, you know, the dinner time, right? Maybe one dish is in there for a little bit longer, but because you, yeah, anyway. So let's do the hair. So the hair, if we go back to here, we're going to take this. Let's get more of this gel on there. Let's get more blue and red. Let's mix that up. We're going to get, I think, a nice brown out of this. So this is just warm red and warm blue together. Get a nice darker brown. And we'll just put big goops of it here in her hair. So this is interesting. Like, it's sort of like the Anna Molka Ahmed painting, except that painting we used the palette knife to do a lot of texture. Here with Agnes Martin, we're doing it just with a paintbrush. I think she was painting oil paints, at this point anyway, towards, you know, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, she's using almost entirely acrylic paint, which is what we're doing, right? Okay, I think that's okay. So now I'm going to take some more blue, some warm blue. We'll mix this into the color. This will get a little bit of a darker quality to this paint. So I'm already thinking to myself, I'm happy with this, the way the hair's turning out, but doesn't it seem like the background might need to be lightened up a little bit? So that's why I always think, like, I don't want to finish, quote unquote, the background and then move entirely to the foreground. There's sometimes where you got to move a little bit back and forth between foreground and background. That definitely needs to go darker. But I think for right now, maybe it's going to take a little bit more blue. This is just our warm blue mixed into this brown. Okay, so I'll leave that for a few minutes. Let's go move on to a different part of the painting. Let's move on to her clothes on the bottom. And then I think we'll be potentially finished, or potentially we need to do some more work in the background, as I think I need to do. But as I said, I'm not sure yet, because you know, we're missing like almost a third of the color on this painting. So I need some more cold blue and more cold yellow, because I think what I'm about to mix here is a bit of a teal, almost like actually, yeah, so I need a little bit more white. Can I use this color? Has it been tainted too much? It's a bit risky because there's a bunch of brown in there. I don't know. Let's see. Let's mix a bit of the blue in here. A little bit of cool yellow. Not bad, not bad. I'm kind of feeling it so far. Pretty close, actually. A bit more blue. Yeah, I think that's okay. If anything, I think I'm going to add more gel medium into this paint. Okay, so it's going to take a lot of gel medium. Go big or go home, right? It's like, if I'm going to use this gel medium, we're going to make this painting thick, I'm going to make this painting thick. So, again, the only thing I just have to remind myself of is that is going to dry clear, and it's also diluting the color, right? So I'm going to put a lot more color back into this paint, because otherwise it's going to dry and look kind of ghostly, and you know, it's you know, in a way it's sort of like adding a lot of water to your soup, or you know, it's sort of like I'm adding ice cubes into my soup. So at first you're like, oh, it looks great, it hasn't affected the taste much. Once those ice cubes melt, however, there's going to be a lot more water in that soup, and that soup isn't going to have quite the same amount of flavor, right? So I'm adding more flavor back into this paint. Now let's just take a look at the color. I think that's pretty close. I might need to add a little bit more blue as I go, but let's just start slopping all of this paint on here. I'm going to try to keep little valleys for this red that I'll put in there eventually. See, I'm just trying to get the paint onto the canvas first. think I'm just going to get rid of a line here. Now, obviously, I want to try to, I'm probably going to bend some of these lines here because, you know, this is one arm, this is, her chest is right about here, and then this is the other arm. So let's even just start bending some of these lines. I wonder how many people are actually going to use gel medium or make their paintings as thick as I'm doing right here. I imagine most people are going to just paint normally, quote unquote, paint this painting normally, but I think you'll be, if you have any kind of gel medium and it's just sitting there on your shelf, why not just sort of take a leap of faith and to experiment, to try doing this. Yeah, I think I'm definitely gonna have to come back in here and do a little bit on the background. Okay, look at that. That's so goopy. I love it. Okay, I think that's enough of that. Obviously, I don't have all the nuance of color, but I'm expecting that as I start putting cold red in these lines, which is what I think she's done, that's going to affect the color anyway. So, that's white, right? That's white. So I need more gel medium. Okay. How should I go about this? Let's take all of this cool red. Yeah, let's take that cool red, mix gel medium into it. By the way, you can see on these tubes of paint, I write cool or warm. Like, now I started doing that for my painting classes so that people when I used to teach in person, they could easily identify those colors, because it takes a little bit of time for people to understand that concept. But subsequently, after that, I started doing that to all my tubes of paint, because when I'm in the thick of it and I'm painting, sometimes I get distracted and I'm just grabbing a tube and squeezing it. Anything that just saves my mind from having to do any thinking when I'm in like a painting mode is much appreciated, because it's just one less thing that I have to be mindful of. Okay, so I'm taking this cool red, cool red. going to attempt to paint. Where should we? Let's start right up here. And I'm going to follow that line all the way down. I'm going to take a bit more paint and just kind of go over Let's go right next to it. Okay. Let's zoom in so you just get how goopy and gross and delightful this experience is. Okay, so there's still, obviously there's some gaps there with some yellows coming through. It's not entirely different than what she's got. So I think what I can do now is I can kind of add a little bit more nuance here with some blues into my greens and into the reds as well. So now I'm going to take some of this warm blue. I'm going to mix that into this color. Sorry, very goopy paint. And let's see, probably So I'm not sure how well this is going to show up on camera, but there we go. So I'm thinking about like the light at the top is what's going to catch most, or let's get these stripes on the top of her clothes are going to catch most of the light, and then as it descends down on her body, they're going to get a little bit darker, right? Obviously, these things are much brighter than hers, but I'm not too concerned about that. That doesn't... I'm not too worried. Let's see. Let's get some more cool blue in here. So this is the green that I used for her clothing. Some cool blue in there. Is there anyone else painting who's using heavy gel? I'm so curious. Or any kind of thickening agent in their paint, or are most people just going for a much thinner application? Okay. Obviously, I'm going to need to do some work on her eyes. That's really the main thing, I think, at this point, is eyes and the background. I'm pretty pleased with what's happening here, but I think I need to lighten up a few places in that background, and potentially even carve this in a little bit. Like, it's not clear to me where her arm should be. Somewhere in here, which should mean maybe it could get darker, a darker blue there. In fact, maybe let's just take this darker brown blue and muddy this area up a bit here. similarly. Okay, interesting. So there's a bunch of you. Heidi says, yeah, I'm using golden extra heavy gel. That's exciting. Eleanor says, I'm not using any medium, but I am using lots of paint. I'm painting many layers to get the different colors. That's cool. That is really cool. One thing to know is, you know, even if you use like a lot of acrylic paint, because it's, you know, there's a lot of water in that paint, as it dries, it's going to we call like self-leveling. It's going to try to kind of lose some of those peaks. You'll still see some of the texture of the paint, but not nearly as much as if you add something like a heavy gel into your paint. So in some ways, using a lot of paint, you get the frustration of painting with a lot of paint, or the pleasure, depending on how you look at it, but you don't quite, it will disappear a little bit. So that's why if you add some heavy gel in it, at least if you go to all that effort of making all of these big peaks, that paint will stay there. And I know that's not exactly what you're talking about, Eleanor, but just for anyone else who's like, oh, I don't have any gel, so I'm just going to scoop lots of paint on there, you may be a little bit disappointed. You're like, oh, well, that's kind of a bummer. Tomorrow, when I look at it, it's not, a lot of the texture has disappeared. And that's just kind of how acrylics behave. Oil paint, on the other hand, because there's no water in the oil paint, basically whatever it looks like when you put it onto the canvas, it's texture-wise anyway, will be basically what it's going to look like once it's dried. Lori says, I'm not painting tonight. I think I might try using my Sennelier abstract paint for this. It will hold the body when dry, and it's not too expensive. Interesting. I didn't even know there was a specific abstract line of paint. Interesting. That makes sense. Usually, not usually, but often, abstract painters do like a little bit more texture, especially if you're doing expressive, kind of abstract expressionist painting. You want some of the gooiness of the paint to come through, because that's really all there is color and texture. Well, that's oversimplification, but I think you know what I mean, right? Okay, so let's go back into the background here and add a little bit more color, because I think it looks, I'm pretty happy with the figure, to be honest. I think it's just, and obviously I'm still going to do some work on the face, but although I'm wondering if I should do the face now before I get all this wet. And yeah, maybe let's do her eyes now. I think that will be helpful, because often that's one of those things, is you look at that, and if the eyes aren't quite sorted out, people aren't quite happy. So now, doing this with thick paint it would be really tricky, so unless I had a really big canvas, so I'm not going to really be using big gobs of paint for this particular part. I can also, you know, it's the other thing too is it can be a little tricky doing this kind of stuff at this stage. Like maybe you want to wait for the painting to dry so that you can plant your hand somewhere on the canvas while you're painting small details. So you could maybe potentially leave the background blank, or as I said, let it dry and then paint some of these details. Because if you're trying to hover over top of the canvas with your hand, because you don't want to get your fingers wet, then it can be a little bit tricky. One thing that I'll just show you that I'll probably do here is, since I know I'm going to do a little bit of work in the background, I can like plant a finger in here, and it's going to get a little bit of paint on it. I can plant that finger there, while I paint some of these details, right? And even though I pull it up and I pull up some paint, that's not too hard for me to fix that particular area. So let's come down here. So what I'm using is basically the same color I used for the hair. This dark blue, it's ultramarine blue. It's my warm blue mixed into the warm brown that I made. What is interesting, I'm just looking at the gaze, like her eyes. In my painting, it looks like she's sort of looking right at me, or right at us on the camera, right? In the original, is it just me, or does it not look like she's sort of looking a little bit downward? It almost looks like she's looking, evading eye contact just a little bit, ever so slightly. So if you want to get a little bit more of that look, it's just a matter of moving the eyes down, or the iris, so it looks a little bit further down. I'm just going to keep my painting like this. I don't think it needs... But that's, you know, for me... Oh, and also I just realized that eyebrow. Huh. I missed that. Should I fix that? Let's go... So I'm going to move this eyebrow up, because she's got a kind of a little bit raised eyebrow. That's interesting. And then I was just painting the top of the eyelid, or sort of basically the shape of the eyeball, really. Okay, so let's just I'm gonna touch that area up here. Well, I need to make it a bit more. I picked up a little bit of that black there, didn't it? Not bad. I'm getting pretty happy with this. I think this nostril over here is a little bit too dark. So now we're talking like subtleties here. Kind of just dialing into that kind of stuff. Shaping the face a little bit. These lips are a little bit too big. That's a little too much. Orange here. Okay. I mean, I'm not gonna fiddle with this face all night long, but I think I'm in the zone and pretty happy with how that's turning out. Let's get some of this dark brown. Shaping her chin and neck there a little bit. Now I wonder if I want to do too much more to those lips. How do I feel about those lips? I'm taking some warm red, mixing, getting a bit of some darker, just some warm red, getting a bit of this darker blue in there. I mean, it's, you know, you're just doing little things, right? In fact, I don't even know if I needed to do that. I'm gonna get some thicker green on her eyes. It's pretty thin in here. And then I got to go back and darken those. Or her irises, pupils, I mean. And also, that forehead line is a little intense. Okay. I think I'm pretty happy with that face. It's not exactly the same. I think I need to back it out and take a look. Maybe what I'll do now is I'll paint the background around her again. I'm gonna come back and just give a little bit more focus and love there. And then we'll just see where we're at. I might be very close to being done. I'm not exactly sure. So there's where I was planting my pinky finger here. There's a little bit of paint that is kind of mixed up there, but that is to be expected. Okay, so this palette is pretty muddy. What I want to do, I want to put in a cool brown back here, right? So let's take, even though this has got some warm blue in it, I'm just going to take it anyway. Mix some cool yellow in here. I'm going to add a little bit of white. Little bit. You saw I barely put any in there. I should just put a little bit more in there. That might have gone a little too far on that one. Okay, so I'm going to take this. That's maybe a little intense. So if that's too much, I'm just going to get a little bit more color back on here. Darken it a bit. Still pretty intense. Maybe we'll take some of the warm yellow and mix it in here. That's going to take some of the saturation off. Wow, that's really bright, isn't it? Ugh. Okay, and it's going to add more blue to it. That's It needs, let's put some, I need some cool red in here. Now we're starting to get a bit of a gray, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I'm going to use some warm yellow in here. I think that cool, I have a bit of competing colors here, so I'm going to take this warm yellow, mix it into this paint. So, you know, I've said many times, this is kind of my favorite part of making a painting. For some people, this is the least favorite part. This is the most frustrating part. But I like kind of going around and trying to figure out how I can solve like a little problem like this. Let's mix a, oh, that's my, I need some cooler, oh, I got cool red still. Cool red, let's mix it right over here. See, I've got so many colors on this paintbrush that it's starting to go a little bit gray. So, where's my... So I need more of that color to come down. So my cool red and warm, or sorry, cool yellow and cool red. not even mixing cool blue into it, because that color is right here, right? So it'll as I mix all of these paints together, it will absorb some of that green and turn it into a brown. Alright, so I'm mixing cool red and cool yellow together. What's nice, I'm actually surprised that a lot of this area under here is quite dry. I'm surprised that it's dried so quickly. I guess I didn't. I don't know. I don't know why it's so dry. I thought I put it on pretty thick, but. So all these cool colors in the background, pushing the warm browns forward. How far down should I go here? I don't know. I'm getting... feeling pretty good about that. Maybe her face just... thinning that out. Her cheeks was maybe a little bit too wide there. Too much baby face. I think that might help. Same thing with her neck here. Now there is a lot of, it looks very yellowy on her face. I don't mind that so much. Something got smudged there on that eye. But otherwise, I think I might be done. Let me just touch that little area up. ear. I feel like just tidying her collar up. Okay. I think do I want to do any detail on that hair some more? Maybe let me just see if I can do a little bit of little tiny work in the hair just to give it a bit more shape. So I'm just using ultramarine blue with a little bit of brown in here. Warm brown. Do I have the shape of that hair down? It's kind of hard to know. I want to bring that neck out a little bit. And conversely, bring the green back in here. Now, what color was that? Okay, I could keep on going and going and going, but I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. Okay, not bad time-wise. Making a painting like this in 2.5 hours. So you just got to be careful when you're turning this over. Ideally, you probably want to just wait until it's dry before signing it or anything, but Okay, so that feels, you know, I'm actually really happy with that. I did not expect, I was not planning on making that painting like that. Let's take a look at these two side by side. I'm gonna be careful I don't get my grubby fingers on them. You know, at first glance, these two paintings couldn't be more different, and you kind of wonder, they look like maybe they're done by two very different artists. You know, obviously there's the stripes in her clothing, and we see stripes here, that, you know, but she could have worn any particular clothes in this painting. I don't know, maybe she got really excited with the way the stripes looked and decided to incorporate them in her work going forward. I do think a few things that I can see in this painting that eventually end up in this painting. One is her interest in texture. So despite what it might look like, we added all this heavy gel into this paint, and we did not do that here. But in these paintings she's most famous for, these full abstract grid paintings, she did use a lot of gesso that she mixed into her paint, and she really liked a rough textured canvas for her abstract paintings, which again is not something like in yesterday's episode. We actually took gesso out of the jar and mixed paint into it and applied it onto the canvas, and she would have actually done more than what we did. So this painting that I did here yesterday should actually have more texture to it. I don't think she would have mixed gel into the painting, but the actual surface she was painting on was like kind of a gritty, really almost like a sandpaper-ish kind of texture. So that is something that I did not do very successfully yesterday. But that would have been, so we see lots of texture here. That texture would have made it into this here. Now we did paint thick globby gobs of paint. This one, very super thin layers of paint, adding glazing fluid or matte medium into the paint so that we could build up many layers of paint. And so on the surface that looks like, well, that couldn't be more different. Thick paint, thin paint. The difference, though, or the similarity, I mean, is that even though this painting is thin layers, there's many, many, many layers of thin paint. Or not even that thin at all, it's just that the paint has been diluted with medium. So in many ways, there's actually a thicker application of paint ultimately in this painting than there is in this one. This one is a few layers of thick paint, but this is many, upwards of maybe even a dozen layers of paint that's got a lot of medium mixed into it. So that's, again, it's almost like she's taken this highly textured surface and then 25 years later is taking that but in a totally different way. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, having made these two paintings, how I'm seeing her develop from one to another, right, over this period of 25 years. You know what is really sad about, well, it's not sad, it's interesting, because it was her choice, is as she became very successful with these paintings and they started to sell for a lot of money, and by the time she died, some of these paintings from the 70s and 80s were selling for $5, $10, $20 million each. Granted, she was probably not getting a lot of that money, although she probably had a bunch of these in her studio or in storage that she would sell. So she didn't die in poverty. But what she did is she took the money from the sale of these paintings, went and bought back a lot of these types of paintings that she did and then destroyed them, which is, you know, for art historians is a tragedy. They look at that and be like, oh my goodness, think of all the great paintings she did that are gone. We have some written records, some black and white photos of what those look like, but they're lost to history. Now, it would have been a shame if you know, all of those paintings were in a museum and it burnt down. That would have, you know, for her, that would have been, and that's happened in World War II. There were countless major artworks, not just paintings, but sculptures, you know, early Roman, Greek sculptures, paintings that were obliterated. Never mind, you know, Renaissance works, Caravaggio, Michelangelo, all sorts of things were destroyed. But she made that decision herself. She wanted this type of painting to be her legacy and not this type of painting. Or even, in fact, I didn't really show those paintings. Let's take a quick venture before I sign off for the day. This great website here, which features many of Canada's greatest artists, and Agnes Martin, even though you know, she's generally considered an American artist because she got her American citizenship, I think, in 1950, actually shortly after this painting was made. But did visit Canada many times later in life, and is certainly embraced by the Canadian art establishment. They try to take her back as our own. But let's just quickly look at, you know, so these are some of the artists she was inspired by when she was younger and when she was in art school. You see, here's a couple of self-portraits she did around the same time. And then she goes to New Mexico and she really falls in love with the landscape there. See here, her on a horse. And these paintings, remember, she's really into Asian art. She's into Asian philosophy at that time, Zen Buddhism. If you look at this painting and then think about some of the artists that we painted, reminds me of Wu Guangzhang a bit. Right, these very bright, colorful paintings, probably, you know, using a larger brush, and it looks like, is that ink or watercolor? Yeah, watercolor and ink on paper. So this is, and applying that same sort of philosophy that is in a lot of Chinese painting in particular, right? So she makes those paintings, and then here's some of the paintings she starts, as she starts getting more and more into abstraction, right? That's only, what, this is 1952, about 4 years after she started moving away from representational painting, right? And then we start getting into this, what we call like non-objective painting, where these shapes are, they don't really bear any resemblance to anything that we know in nature or even human-made things, right? And we see in her studio here. And then here's where in the late 1950s, I think 1960, she herself, I think, says 1963 was her first full abstract painting in the vein of what she ultimately did. But you could see there's obviously a few years earlier before we do. Now, this doesn't have any pencil lines, and it's not gridded out quite the way that she would eventually do it. But you could really see her moving into this particular area here. You can see, again, this textured using paper on there. Nails nailed into the canvas itself. And then by this time, 1960, I think from 1965 to, oh yeah, but 1967 to 71, I think she stops, yeah, she stops, she left painting behind as well. and she burned all of the art left in her studio. Right? That's so a lot of the work. So she not only, after she became famous, just went back and bought a lot of her early work, but even at this point in time, she's like, burn it all down. I'm taking off, leaving New York. I'm going to New Mexico, starting my life over again. And once she gets there, there's, again, about 5 or 6 years where she's not making art at all. Or maybe she was making a lot of art and destroyed it. We don't really know. She was a very private person, did not do that many interviews. So really what we have of her is her artwork, which is the way that she wanted it to be. I mean, there's some artists that love talking to the press. She was not one of them, right? And then, of course, here's the painting we made just yesterday. And then let's just kind of quickly wrap up. So you can see here's her artwork displayed. This would have been the way she would have wanted it displayed. You know, like these big paintings, often a lot of big paintings in small rooms so that you're absorbed by them, right? They're surrounding you and you get kind of like, you fall into them, right? You're almost like in a submarine surrounded by portholes into this other dimension. Anyway, one last quick little thing here. These key works. She also made a few films too. I think only one of them survived because, again, she destroyed one of the other ones. She literally took it herself to the city dump and dumped it. She was working on it for years and then just decided, you know what, I'm done. Going in the trash. Well, okay. So I think that's enough of that, and whatever I have left of my voice is disappearing. So I'm going to call it a day here. We're going to do a special painting tomorrow to celebrate Titian. I'm trying to remember, is it his? I think it's his death, because I don't know if we know when he was born. Especially artists. Titian was a Italian artist from the late Renaissance, an incredible painter. He's one of these painters. We'll talk all about him tomorrow, but we're going to be painting a painting that is in the National Gallery of Canada's collection. One of the few Titian paintings in North America. Most of it is in museums in Europe. I'm super excited to make that painting. Yeah, it'll be it'll be about as different as possible as these two paintings. Even though it's a portrait, it's going to be, I mean, if you were disappointed because he said, I wanted to kind of learn more traditional portrait painting techniques, that was a bummer. We didn't do that in today's painting. Boy, do I have a surprise for you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to go right back to one of the greatest figurative painters of all time, indisputably Titian, and he's going to give us a run for our money tomorrow. I'll try to make it as straightforward and easy as possible for even the most beginner artists, so I hope you join me tomorrow. If you enjoyed today's episode, and I would appreciate, before you sign off, is just hit that like button. That does myself and any other YouTuber a great service. It helps other people find these videos. You see lots of people, almost every class, a new person joins up and is so excited to be a part of our community. That's just by you helping me and them to find us, right? By liking the video, and not everybody does that, so just a little hint. And if you want to leave a donation, there's a link to PayPal in the description below. You want to send a check or money order. I am starting my classes back up. I had my first meeting at university at Emily Carr earlier today, so I'll be back on campus, teaching in person in just a couple of weeks. So if you did want to send something to me, a physical thing, there will be that opportunity, because I know some people don't use PayPal, don't want to do e-transfers, just want to mail a check. So if you want to do that, I'll give you the address, or you can look it up, and you could send an envelope full of cash to the university, care of my name, right? Not that you probably is not a good idea to do that, but anyway, that would be a possibility. Okay, thanks everyone for joining me. I'm delirious right now, so I hopefully will be a little bit more aware of what's going on tomorrow afternoon. And we're going to do it 5 o'clock is when our painting session will begin. If you can't join us, remember it's all recorded and you can watch it anytime at your convenience. Thank you everyone, and stay safe wherever you are on our beautiful planet. And yeah, good night everybody. We'll talk to you soon.